Hey folks, AI is hot right now, and Adobe just released a new feature for your Experience platform called AI Assistant. Now, I know what you're thinking. Cool, another chatbot, but this one's a little bit more unique in that it has the power of all of your information that corresponds with your implementation and tooling, which you wouldn't otherwise have in other tools like ChatGPT or insert one of a million different AI tools out there. And what we're going to do is take a look at this tool and try out some suggested use cases to see how we can be better at our jobs. And there's no better way to start than just asking it how we can best use it. So let's start by asking the AI assistant what it's good at. So I asked, what kind of information can you provide? Well, it's designed to provide a wide range of information and support to users. And so here's some key areas, according to the AI assistant: learning concepts and continuing workflows, troubleshooting, Sandbox hygiene, value analysis, and search. Now we're going to dive into each one of these and test out a use case for all 5 of these. But let's say you ask this about 10 times. Maybe it will give you 10 different answers. I don't know. These all seem pretty reasonable. You can always click on this light bulb icon called discoverability. Here you can find more of a bottom-up method of figuring out what kind of questions you can ask, starting with, well, the tactic. Let's ask questions about a data set for operational insights. How many data sets have been ingested? Which source connector is associated with some data set? Or how many data sets do I have? Which, to be honest, if you're in this tool any amount of time, you'll be able to see your total number of data sets on the home screen. We're going to ask it some questions that I think will be more useful to us, like how long has it been since a data set has last received data, stuff like that. Next, we're going to take a look at the audiences, which might be a little bit more practical. Which audiences use other audiences? So you can understand where there are dependencies. What is the distribution of the number of profiles across audiences? Which audiences have 0 profiles? Which ones, basically aren't being used? Now, this is really helpful if you need to trim audiences. Obviously, in this property, we only have 7 audiences, so we're not doing a ton with it, but we do have a lot of data sets and a lot of schemas and, a modest amount of profiles. So that should give us enough to work with to figure out how to be efficient with understanding how we can trim stuff down and, maybe get some valid use cases out of this. Let's start with the first suggestion up here, learning concepts and continuing workflows. Now, the basis of this is you have the power of Adobe's documentation and Experience League that's fueling answers that can help me answer some, hopefully more abstract questions. Now, I'm going to start with real-time CDP and ask a few questions about some fundamentals if I'm a new user. So my first question is going to be, what are some concepts of RTCDP that I need to know before getting started? Awesome. So it's going to give me a list of things that I need to know. For instance, profiles and audiences, data ingestion and management, data governance and trust, and data activation. Now, something that might be important to me is understanding how I can control cost and maybe mitigate profiles and hopefully learn some best practices. So let's ask it about that. That's really cool. So it's saying, mitigating cost with licensing is crucial for optimizing your usage and blah, blah, blah. So use the dashboard, configure ingestion filters, enable disable data sets, configure experience, event expirations, and periodically check profile composition reports. This is something that's really cool that you wouldn't necessarily find out from some consultants. What's so cool about this is you can actually go into your implementations the right way the first time. Now, I can't tell you how many stories I've heard of people who were just kind of playing around with profile data sets and accidentally enabled a few too many, which could impact cost, but, as a precaution, they deleted those data sets and, had to redo some work. So these are important questions that you want to be able to ask so you go in the right way the first time. Now, I think we understand the learning concepts and continuing workflows piece. There are a lot of questions that you can ask specifically around real-time CDP, AJO, even CJA. I don't necessarily want to use this time to talk through that because that's more for curiosity as opposed to useful troubleshooting, which is number 2. Troubleshooting. So AI Assistant can help you debug basic errors that you might encounter in your workflow. If you're facing any issues, AI Assistant can provide guidance on how to resolve them. Awesome. So a lot to talk about here. We're going to go through 1 or 2 specific use cases. The first one being debugging data sets where there are batch ingestion failures. And this is a pretty common thing. And we're looking at, you tell the screen changed because we're looking at the Blue Acorn ICI website data. And we're just going to ask AI Assistant. We have a batch failure on November 5th, and I want to understand why we had that failure. So let's ask, here's. Okay, it looks like we have ourselves an answer. It says, based on the provided documents, it seems the error was caused by a malformed timestamp on the payload. So since the timestamp doesn't properly validate against the XDM schema due to the incorrect month value, basically caused the error. That's a really cool use case and a really interesting example. And obviously my next question would be like, why were we getting malformed timestamps? I want to show another layer of AI Assistant that I found really helpful. If you click on Show Sources, what it's going to do is show you where it's getting its information. So what are the sources of its knowledge base when it provides the answer? In addition, you can find meta information about your sandbox and dataset IDs, such as when some data sets were created, and all of this is basically to kind of show its work. Now, this extra information might be a little bit too much for me. I'm probably more interested in sources, but I want to go a little bit deeper with this. Let's ask the AI Assistant if it can provide the code to actually download the failed batch. So it can actually provide the physical code that you can use to download the failed batch information. But I want to go a little bit deeper and ask it if it can actually literally just provide the information for me. Okay. It looks like we hit a slight snag there where it can provide some of the code, but it doesn't necessarily have the API querying capabilities of diving into those, physically into the failed batches and retrieving the physical file of those failed batches. But just for giggles, let's ask it anyway. Doesn't look like it. And honestly, the caveat is currently the knowledge graph contains operational data. So my expectation isn't that it's going to dive into our physical data sets and pull out actual data points or retrieve physical data points from those data sets. So this is a pretty reasonable expectation. The last thing I want to troubleshoot is something with my data flows. So sometimes you have a data flow that's set up and data is not being ingested or processed, and you just want to quickly find out if there's anything wrong with a data flow. And so I had already typed in the question here, are there any errors with my data flow? And I got back a response saying, this question seems to be about a topic which is outside of AI Assistant's present scope of knowledge. Well, I know a little bit better, and I know that AI Assistant knows a lot more than it thinks it does. And so it suggested, ask anyway, are there any errors with my data flows? So I asked it anyway, and it turns out that it knows the answer. And what it does is it will show you the SQL that it used to figure out whether or not there were errors. And this is one of the coolest features of AI Assistant, where you can actually look at the physical query to understand, first of all, how to write better queries, but second, how it derived the answer. Clicking on View Source Query is probably one of my favorite features here, as someone who doesn't like going around writing SQL, but also wants to understand how it retrieved the data. So a few lessons here. Number one, this has happened several times where I've asked a question where I'm pretty certain it knows the answer, but then it comes up with related suggestions. Ask anyway, are there any errors with my data flows, or, when's the last time a data set was used, or something like that. It will try again and come up with the right answer. I do wish it would just kind of default to ask anyway until it makes sure that it can't answer my question, so I don't have to click this. But it's not too cumbersome. Okay, let's talk about Sandbox hygiene. Now, we want to use AI Assistant to identify any duplicates or unused objects in your sandbox. It can help you efficiently manage and maintain your sandbox and keep it organized. So what we're going to do is look at our data sets and our schemas, because we can see that we have a lot of data sets that are adding up, and we have a lot of schemas. We've been doing a lot of testing here at Blue Acorn, so there's probably going to be a ton of junk. So my first step is to figure out what are some of the data sets that we can delete. And I want to find, let's say, can you list the data sets that haven't been used for at least 3 months and have no ingested records? Okay, so we got this this message again. It says it appears to be outside of AI Assistant scope. I'm going to click Ask Anyway, press Enter, and boom. There you go. So, again, this is one of those situations where the AI Assistant has low self-esteem and doesn't think it can answer a question, so you have to ask it twice. But what's really neat about this is I can now just download these results and take it back and manually delete it, or delete it via API. And again, we have our source query here, so you can actually look at the SQL that it used to determine whether or not data set was inactive. So next we have value analysis. And this one's really interesting because it says AI Assistant can help you identify your most used data objects and assess any performance indicators. Can also assist in finding the most valuable data objects for your specific use case. So let's actually ask it a question about our most used data objects. Like, I'm curious as to what the outcome is. What are our most used data objects? All right, we get our usual low confidence response. So I'm going to ask it anyway. So we have a list of data sets and how many audiences use those specific data sets, which is kind of interesting because when you ask what are our most used data objects, that's kind of a broad question. What do you mean used? And, in terms of audiences versus just existing in a data set, this is a pretty reasonable definition where you have data sets that are used in specific audiences. And it's really nice to see that, like, okay, I can now understand if I have a ton of audiences and a lot of data sets and some of them are gathering data, but they aren't used in audiences, maybe we start asking the question of, should this be a data set in AEP? So I might ask this question if I wanted to trim down the data sets that I have, or ask business partners what they intend to use those data sets for if they're not being included in audiences. Next, I want to understand what data objects I can use to create value, or what are the most valuable data objects given a specific use case. So I'm going to make up a use case real quick. So this generated a how-to for creating an audience that would target repeat visitors to the website. Now, this doesn't specifically give me the exact code, but let's look at some sources. Looks like these are just links, and that's okay. Again, this is a little vague, and the AI assistant has to make a lot of assumptions. Like, for instance, what data from what data set on what website? What do you mean by repeating visitor? And while it can make some assumptions, there's risk associated with making those assumptions. So I do like that it gives me a step-by-step readout of how I can actually achieve this. The last thing we want to look at is the search capability. So if you're looking for a specific experience, platform, objects such as audience, dataset, destination, schema, or source, AI Assistant can help you find them. Okay, this is going to be kind of interesting because I'm going to ask it something completely open-ended, and let's say, can you find me all of the audiences I use for bot detection? Now, I've built audiences that isolate humans from bots. And by the way, if you are interested in understanding how we achieve this, please reach out directly to me on LinkedIn or send me an email, jim.gordon@blueacornici.com, and I will be happy to show you how we are isolating humans from bots in order to laser focus our marketing at humans as opposed to just throwing away money on bot traffic. All right, well, let's ask this anyway. It seems like it lost its confidence. And it kind of adjusted the question for me a little bit. Can you find me all the audiences I use for bot detection? So what I'm testing here is to interpret if it can extract kind of context clues in the questions to, like, say, bot detection. So if I click on audiences, what we can see is that we have audiences that are associated with humans and audiences that are associated with bots. So there are a few. So bot detection data, only human traffic, probably human, stuff like that. A lot of these were just test audiences, but the idea was if I said, hey, I want to find bots, it's like, okay, well, I see that there's some sort of differentiation between humans and bots. And again, those are assumptions that it's making. I'm going to ask about, and so this might be a little bit too abstract. So let's ask something a little bit more direct. Can you tell me where to find my Blue Acorn ICI website data set? Now, this is really specific, and my expectation is that the outcome is going to be some kind of a link that I can click to take me to that data set. Now, let's see what it comes up with. All right, cool. So it found it. And let's see what happens when I click on this. Takes me directly to the data set, which is exactly what I wanted. Now, if you have a lot of different data sets, I did use very specific language in here. So let's try asking it something a little bit more broad. Can you find data sets for all of my websites? Now, we're making an assumption here that the AI assistant is looking at the name of each data set and understanding if it has maybe like website in the name, or maybe the schema has okay, yeah, and here's the outcome. There are no data sets ingested related to websites, so you have to come pretty close to the name of the data set. So let me try one more time. All right, we're going to say, can you find the Blue Acorn website data set for me? Now, I didn't spell it exactly like it's spelled in the data set list or in the as the data set, but oh, so it's outside its expertise. But we're gonna challenge it and give it some more confidence. So you can get a rough match where it says the dataset name Blue Acorn ICI website is found. Based on your question, here was the query. So we could take a look at the query, and see that it was basically using wildcards with Blue Acorn and website. So this is actually really useful because you can do an approximation. So if you have a lot of different data sets, but you know the approximate name of it, you could likely use AI Assistant, but you have to have the terms in the correct order. So that's it. I was really impressed with AI Assistant. I know it's still being worked on, and there are a few areas of improvement. For one, I wish it had more confidence in itself. I have to click ask anyway, and then magically I get the right answer, which I would like for it to just kind of ask itself anyway and just try to give me the right answer the first go around. But that's okay. I think it's really good at finding data stuff like data sets that aren't being used. It's exceptional at looking through documentation. It's great at helping you understand how to build audiences and understanding the composition of stuff like audiences. It needs a little work on looking in schemas and understanding whether schemas are applied to data sets. I was getting some timeouts there, and again, I think it's a confidence thing. I feel like the AI assistant can do it. It just wasn't giving itself enough time. Finally, I really loved using it as a tool to hone in my SQL skills or lack thereof, so I can better query things specifically for myself. So I found that this did save time, but it saved time for specific use cases. But that's the point of these tools. It's not going to save time for literally every single use case. It's going to save time for specific use cases. And for those use cases, I think AI Assistant does a really good job. So I would love to see you give it a try and leave a comment, give some feedback, and see how you use AI Assistant. It's a pretty powerful tool, and it's still brand new. So I know that there's going to be a lot of updates to make it even more powerful. And looking forward to future iterations where we can start querying our actual data and taking us through journeys where it can make recommendations based on how we're collecting data and how we want to make decisions for our business. So shout out to the team who's building it. They're doing a great job, and looking forward to seeing what's next.